Beyond presents spoilers for Beware the Cat by William Baldwin. This is a spoilerific overview of the book Beware the Cat. It is not, however, going to be exhaustive for a number of reasons. Firstly, we don't yet have a full and perfect recording of the complete text for you. There is an exploratory reading, and there is the upcoming release of the live adaptation that we recorded last year, but they are either a bit rushed or a bit cut down. Secondly, it's a long book. It'll take ages to do everything. And thirdly, I've done all the readings, so in terms of hearing voices, it'll be a bit bread on bread for the soundscape, so it's going to be a bit dancey-aroundy. The live adaptation that I recorded last year will be available for the foreseeable of 2024 to 25, but not on the podcast. It'll be on our Patreon feed. It's not going to be behind a paywall, but you do need to sign up for free to the Patreon to access it. This is largely because it is difficult and annoying to put up and take down audio on the podcast. I can't just switch them off, and I need to be able to do that because Beware the Cat is soon, he said, fingers crossed, to go into a full production based on the live version that we recorded. So I need to keep it slightly outside of the usual way of things to ensure that it doesn't harm our ticket sales. So if you want to listen to the audio of our live version, you can go to our Patreon feed, sign up, and listen. Links to parts 1 and 2 will be in the show description. But if you're still listening, let's enter Spoilerland. Spoiler, 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 Spoilerland. Faster, pussycat. Kill, kill. Regular listeners to this podcast will be familiar with Beware the Cat and the author William Baldwin. We have chatted with experts about this book and his later work curating A Mirror for Magistrates. And this is mostly an overview. It's not a deep dive. So if you want to get more of the background that's already been covered, there are links in the show description. But there is one detail about its genesis that I really want to touch upon. And that's the setting of the book. It is set during the revels at court of Edward VI, towards the end of his reign, and purports to be a true-to-life account of a conversation held late one night with members of the household. The book claims the household are working on a show based on Aesop called Aesop's Crow, which is used to open the discussion as to whether animals have reason or not. Now, it's true that the characters featured were pretty much all real people who were broadly speaking about the court at that time. But there is no external evidence that Aesop's Crow was ever produced. It seems likely that Baldwin tweaked some true elements of that season, the room where the men all gathered, their late-night chats, their discussion of a show, but possibly he changed the show they were producing to fit the opening of the story a little bit better. But there is evidence that they were producing a show at that time that would lead directly towards some of the ideas of this book. I suggest that Baldwin thought that the title of the show was perhaps too on the nose for his novel, even though it might have suggested his theme for the book. During our live show, I produced a short sketch about this show from those revels. So let me send you back to the pre-show for my performance of Beware the Cat, with myself, Sarah Blake, Valentina Vinci, and Alexandra Kataigida on spoons.
Good evening. Here is the news. Edward VI is unwell. He has been on the throne for 6 years and his legs have gone numb. During his short reign, he has gone further than his father, Henry VIII, with the English Reformation, pursuing a more extreme form of Protestantism on often unwilling people.
1.
At the top of the year, Edward VI had been very poorly.
2.
His chest was weak. He possibly had TB.
3.
But as the spring of 1553 approached, Edward VI seemed to recover.
4.
And there were ordered entertainments for Easter and May Day.
5.
One of these works was entitled The Mask of Cats.
6.
It required 6 cat costumes for the performance.
7.
And the cat costumes were made of real cat.
8.
In total, the number of cats utilised for this one-off entertainment...
8.5.
Wait. In total, the number of cats utilised for this one-off entertainment was 360.
9.
If Edward VI liked cats,
10.
he had a bloody strange way of showing it.
11.
Just imagine you loved cats and your friends said, "We're holding a cat-themed party.
12.
Just for you."
13.
You'd be a bit miffed if you discovered the event required
14.
Catmageddon.
15.
Unless, that is, Edward VI hated cats.
16.
In which case, he was more of a git than we thought.
17.
How many more cats do we need?
343. 342. 341.
Yes, thank you. I'm a classically trained actor, you know. What was that?
It was a cat.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
No, it wasn't. That was a dog.
No, it was a cat.
It was a dog.
That was a cat.
Well, it was a cat.
Exactly.
Are you trying to sneak in other animals into the mix?
No. Yes.
Just cats.
Have you ever tried getting this many cats in one place?
No.
It's chaos. It's like herding cats.
It is herding cats.
See, it's even harder than you think.
That was a sheep!
No, it wasn't. It was a cat.
Weird sounding cat.
It's just a bit poorly.
Well, that's not an issue anymore, is it?
No, it's dead. You don't know the strain this is having on the workers. It's horrific in here. We got cat PTSD. Every time I see a furry sweater, I get flashbacks. And the allergens.
I'll send you some antihistamines.
You can't do that. They don't deliver to the 16th century. I hate to think what this number of cat skins will do to the audience. If you were allergic and, I don't know, had a weak chest like a certain king. Probably kill him.
Oh, it'll be fine. The king was dead within months. Within days of the May performance of The Mask of Cats, he had a relapse of his ongoing condition and died. Coincidence?
Yes.
Oh, shut up, you cat-hating bastard.
Charming. Which is where I came in to do the show. So now, I can't prove that The Mask of Cats was the genesis of Beware the Cat, but the coincidence seems a little too great to ignore. Following these actual events, Baldwin writes the book. But it doesn't see the light of day until after Queen Mary has died. He wasn't having any success with publishing under her reign because he was what we would later call a Protestant, and Mary was, of course, Catholic. And there we hit the not desperately subtle coding of the title. Beware the Catholic. And the book, uncut, will constantly dig at the other side of the confession. And those reading the text or listening to the exploring sessions will notice that, I cut most of the obvious anti-Catholic preening from the book for my live show. There's some of the more under-the-table stuff still there, but the big, inverted commas, jokes on faith are largely gone. But the publishers didn't remove that element from the text when it was finally printed. In fact, they added to it. It was almost a marketing opportunity for them. In later printings, there was an introductory verse added to the text by someone called T.K. I don't know how maximalist they were. These verses were added to note that the book was initially held back from being published and that the anti-Catholic bias of the text was coming into its own with the threat from Spain. So here's another bit of DVD extras from the live show of the introduction to the reader, written by TK, performed by Sarah Blake and Valentina Vinci.
This little book, Beware the Cat, most pleasantly compiled, in time obscured was, and so, since that, hath been exiled.
Exiled, because perchance at first it showed the toys and the drifts of such as then by wiles and wills maintained popish shifts.
Shifts such as those in such a time delighted for to use, whereby full many simple souls they did full sore abuse.
Abuse, yeah, sure, and that with spite, whenas the cat can tell of many pranks of popish priests, both foolish mad and fell.
Fell, sure and vain, if judgment right appear to be in place, and so as fell in pleasant wise, this fiction shows their grace.
Grace? Nay, sure ungraciousness of such and many more, which may be told in these our days to make us laugh also.
Also to laugh, nay, rather weep, to see such shifts now used, and that in every sort of man true virtue is abused.
Abused, yeah, and quite downcast. Let us be sure of that. And therefore now, as has been said, I say, beware the cat.
The cat full pleasantly will show some slights that now are wrought, and make some laugh, which unto mirth to be constrained are loath.
Loath, yeah, and for overpassing grief, that much bereaves their mind, for such disorder as in states of every sort they find.
Find? Yea, who can now boast but that the cat will him disclose? Therefore, in midst of mirth, I say, beware the cat to those.
Many thanks to Sarah Blake and Valentina Vinci for that. So, then the novel starts, and I'm going to call it a novel, even though I appreciate that it's not a slam dunk label. The book, as Baldwin wrote it, opens with an epistle dedicatory to the Right Worshipful Esquire John Young, grace and health. And I was actually quite saddened to cut this from the live show because it sets out some lovely details, but it also sets the story within a book. It's literary, not performative, so I wanted to sidestep it. Other people have done it differently. See the discussing episode with Rachel Stenner. But what the dedication does is, again, set the story in a real-world context. This is real. Look, here's the author writing a note to the publisher sometime around 1553. Meow. I've penned for your mastership's pleasure one of the stories which Master Streamer told the last Christmas, and which you so fain would have heard reported by Master Ferrers himself, and although I be unable to pen or speak the same so pleasantly as he could, yet have I so nearly used both the order and words of him that spake them, which is not the least virtue of a reporter, but that I doubt not but that he and Master Willett shall in the reading think they hear Master Streamer speak, and he himself in the like action shall doubt whether he speaketh or readeth. I have divided his oration into 3 parts, and set the argument before them, and an instruction after them, with such notes as might be gathered thereof, so making it book-like, and entitled, Beware the Cat. Meow. And so this is the first level of a Russian doll of a story, a note to the publisher pointing out that this isn't the author's story, it's a relation of Master Streamer's story that Baldwin is telling us. He also begins the process of building the character of Streamer in the story. Master Streamer. Someone who has a very clear character that Baldwin thinks he has imitated well. And he even appeals to the witness of Ferrers to answer what he sounds like. And with that throat clearing, we go into the framing device proper. It chanced that at Christmas last I was at court with Master Ferrers, then master of the King's Majesty's pastimes, about setting forth of certain interludes, which for the King's recreation we had devised and were in learning. In which time, among many other exercises among ourselves, we used nightly at our lodging to talk of sundry things for the furtherance of such offices wherein each man is then served. For which purpose it pleased Master Ferrers to make me his bedfellow, and upon a pallet cast upon the rushes in his own chamber to lodge Master Willett and Master Streamer, the one his astronomer, the other his divine.
Baldwin sets out his characters and the argument of the story.
Meow. And among many other things, too long to rehearse, it happened on a night which I think was the 28th of December. After that Master Ferrers was come from the court and in bed, there fell a controversy between Master Streamer, who with Master Willett had already slept their first sleep, and me, that was newly come unto bed, the effect whereof was whether birds and beasts had reason. The occasion thereof was this. I had heard that the king's players were learning a play of Aesop's Crow, wherein the most part of the actors were birds, the device whereof I discommended, saying it was not comical to make either speechless things to speak or brutish things to common reasonably, and although in a tale it might be sufferable to imagine and tell of something by them spoken or reasonably done, which kind Aesop laudably used, yet it was uncomely, said I, and without example of any author to bring them in lively personages to speak, do, reason, and allege authorities out of authors.
And so Master Streamer speaks up and says he has special knowledge of talking animals, and he tells this little Christmas gathering the story of how he found out that animals have reason. There follow 3 orations by Master Streamer. Now the first is all about Streamer learning about this idea that cats, specifically, other animals are included, can talk. He tells us that he's living in a room built upon the wall near Aldersgate and near to a place where bodies are left on display. You couldn't really get more Gothic than that. It conjures future echoes of Frankenstein working, or perhaps closer to where this story is going, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a dark garret where a proto-scientist works away. Certainly a pseudo-academic anyway. Another thing this opening establishes is that this guy is a massive windbag. He goes on and on about the names of London gates.
Being lodged, as I thank him I have been often, at a friend's house of mine, which more roomish than garish without, standing at St. Martin's Lane end, and hangeth partly upon the town wall, that is called Aldersgate, either of one Aldrich or else of elders, that is to say, ancient men of the city, which among them builded it, as bishops did Bishopsgate. Or else of Eldon trees, which perchance as they do in the gardens now there and about, and called thereof Eldon Gate, as Moorgate took the name of the field without it, which hath been a very more. Or else, because it is the most ancient gate of the city, which thereof in respect of the other as Newgate called the Elder Gate, or else as Ludgate taketh the name of Lud, who builded it. Meow.
And also in a pedantic way about why leaving the bodies of the executed dead unburied is wrong. And he does that, of course, because what might corpses left outside attract? Carrion birds and, of course, cats. The book doesn't linger on that connection, but it's there to thread us into the next sequence mentioning cats making noise in the neighbourhood, round a fire with others in the household. Our narrator opens the floor to a number of competing ideas as to the intelligence of cats. So we now get more stories within this story, which is inside a story. All these stories are slightly different kinds of shaggy cat story. And no one round this particular fire
quite agrees with the other as to how cats may or may not be intelligent or how that functions. And this is something that Baldwin, our author, does all the time. He does it in Mirror for Magistrates as well. It's not quite a Rashomon situation in the sense that they all saw one thing and they all have differing views, but it's that people don't necessarily agree as to how cats are or are not intelligent. It's an argument that people are having, and it's a way of making the idea of intelligent cats plausible to us as readers. It allows a host of different views about how that plausibly could work, or sometimes implausibly. We get a depiction in these discussions around this fire of a potential cat society, a secret society who have a power structure like, well, Catholicism. And we also get a few casual attacks on the Irish, not unconnected with the anti-Catholicism, but within that we also get our first properly horrific moment. There is a story centred on a deserted church around a burning fire where people are cooking meat, and a cat speaking to these people, demanding increasing amounts of food. It's a genuinely sinister and dark moment. Meow. And while this kern was in the church, he thought it best to dine, for he had eaten little that day. Wherefore he made his boy go gather sticks, and made a fire in the church, and killed the sheep, and after the Irish fashion laid it thereupon, and roasted it. But when it was ready, and that he thought to eat it, there came in a cat, and set her by him, and said in Irish, "Shane foel," which is, "Give me some meat." He, amazed at this, gave her the quarter that was in his hand, which immediately she did eat up, and asked, "More?" till she had consumed all the sheep, and like a cormorant, not satisfied therewith, still asked for more. Wherefore they supposed it were the devil, and therefore, thinking it wisdom to please him, killed the cow which they had stolen, and when they had flayed it, gave the cat a quarter, which she immediately devoured. Then they gave her 2 other quarters, and in the meanwhile, after their country fashion, they did cut a piece of the hide and pricked it upon 4 stakes, which they set about the fire, and therein they set a piece of the cow for themselves. By this time the cat had eaten 3 quarters, and called for more. Wherefore they gave her that which was a seething, and doubting lest, when she had eaten that, she would eat them too, because they had no more for her, they got them out of the church, and the kern took his horse, and away he rode as fast as he could hie. When he was a mile or 2 from the church, the moon began to shine, and his boy espied the cat upon his master's horse behind him, and told him, whereupon the kern took his dart, and turning his face towards her, flang it, and struck her thorough with it. But immediately there came such a sight of cats, that after long fight with them, his boy was killed and eaten up. And he himself, as good and as swift as his horse was, had much to do to escape. Meow. And the nightmare doesn't end there in this story, as the sole survivor of this cat attack is then, in proper last reel horror film mode, killed when he thinks he's safe at home. This launches streamers' speakers into a host of conjectures. Do cats have gods? Do they have a hierarchy in their society? How do they communicate with each other around the world? That's answered, but that they have couriers who travel on ships. Another tells of cats coming to the rescue of a fellow abused feline. And then they go into the question of, well, are talking cats real cats? Or are they witches? Now, I had to skip a lot of this witchcraft element in my live version, but I will pause on it a little bit here, because they ask, are speaking cats witches in disguise, and then argue about how that works. Surely there's a compression of mass problem if a witch has to get a body into the size of a cat.
Indeed, quoth a well-learned man, and one of excellent judgment that was then in the company. It doth appear that there is in cats, as in all other kinds of beasts, a certain reason and language whereby they understand one another. But as touching this, Grimalkin I take rather to be an haggart or a witch than a cat, for witches have gone often in that likeness, and thereof have come the proverb as true as common, that a cat hath 9 lives, which is to say, a witch may take on her a cat's body 9 times. Oh, by my faith, sir, that is strange, quoth I myself, that a witch should take on her a cat's body. I have read the Pythonesses could cause their spirits to take upon them dead men's bodies, and could at their pleasure take upon them any other sorts, but that a woman, being so large a body, should strain her into the body of a cat, I have not much heard of, nor can well perceive how it may be, which maketh me promise you believe it less.
And they argue that point for a bit.
Well, Master Streamer, quoth he, although witches may take upon them cats' bodies, or alter the shape of their or other bodies, yet this is not done by putting their own bodies thereunto, but either by bringing their souls for the time out of their bodies and putting them in the other, or by deluding the sight and fantasies of the seers. Then, quoth he who had been in Ireland, I cannot tell, sir, by what means witches do change their one likeness in the shapes of other things, but I have heard of so many and seen so much myself that I am sure they do it. For in Ireland, as they have been in England, witches are for fear had in high reverence, and they be so cunning that they can change the shapes of things as they list in their pleasure. Meow.
And so here we return to the question of witches changing their likenesses, and they relate a common story of changing the shapes of things for sale. So don't put the swine you buy off a witch in water, or it will disappear. See Dr. Faustus, or Faustus, later on. And then we go off on a tangent about witches turning into wolves. Meow. There was also in Ireland one nation whereof some one man and woman are at every 7 years' end turned into wolves, and so continue in the woods the space of 7 years. And if they hap to live out the time, they return to their own form again, and other twain are turned for the like time into the same shape, which is a penance, as they say, enjoined that stock by St. Patrick for some wickedness of their ancestors. And that this is true, witnessed a man whom I left alive in Ireland, who had performed this 7 years' penance, whose wife was slain, while she was a wolf in her last year. And again, there's quite a lot of this kind of thing in the culture of the time. We will see this in the, in theory, true tale of Stub Peter. So if the Irish can turn themselves into wolves, the English can turn themselves into cats. Which returns us to the theme of, do natural cats have a language that can be understood? And at this point, examples of men who did a Dr. Dolittle are told. All this chat of commonplace tall tales and conjectures of the supernatural leaves our narrator wondering about that question of if it is possible to talk to animals. Thinking face. And thus ends the first oration. Now, the cleverness of this sequence is not that it's trying to convince us that everything that everybody says is true. The speakers all disagree on various points, and much of it is clearly nonsense. but that it raises a universe of questions about the possibility that some of it might be true, and that maybe within all the nonsense it is possible that cats can talk, and that science, or an ancient pseudoscience, might have a rational answer to this question. Meow.
When this tale was ended, the clock struck 9, whereupon old Thomas, because he had far to his lodging, took his leave and departed. The rest of the company got them either to their business or to their beds, and I went straight to my chamber, before remembered, and took a book in my hand to have studied, but the remembrance of this former talk so troubled me that I could think of nothing else, but mused still, and, as it were, examined more narrowly that every man had spoken.
And it's that kind of carefully framed pseudobollocks that hooks the claws of the story into the heart of the reader. Clever, clever Baldwin. The second part of Master Streamer's oration is pure Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or perhaps the Invisible Man. It's all about making the potion that would help our protagonist, Master Streamer, hear cat. And here the text leans into the fact that the narrator is not necessarily the greatest scholar in the universe. He skims the recipe, guesses that the main ingredient is probably a hedgehog, and then just seems to throw in everything else he happens to come across on the day. His astrological work is frequently wrong, and basically you start getting the idea the dude's a fool, as well as a windbag. The narrative has fun with his hunting expedition to get his ingredients. He ends up offending some hunters and gets a beating, gets attacked by a kite, and eventually accepts the corpse of a cat for use in Streamer's marvellous medicine. Meow.
And with those 2 hounds at my girdle, I went a-hunting, till indeed under a hedge in a hole of the earth by the root of an hollow tree I found an hedgehog, whom I killed straight with my knife, saying, Shabal washmeth gorgona jiskuda. And with the other beasts hung him at my girdle, and came homeward as fast as I could hie. But when I came in the close besides Islington, commonly called St. John's Field, a kite, belike very hungry, spied at my back the skinless fox, and thinking to have had a morsel, strake at it, and that so eagerly that one of his claws was entered so deep that before he could loose it, I drew out my knife and killed him, saying, Yevol shaleg hifuka ishkuda, and to make up the mess, brought him home with the rest.
The methodology is deliberately revolting. It's all entrails and stooping and distilling and beating and pounding.
Then I took a piece of the cat's liver and a piece of the kidney, a piece of the milt and the whole heart, the fox's heart and the lights, the hare's brain, the kite's maw and the urchin's kidneys. All these I beat in a mortar together till it were small, and then made a cake of it and baked it upon a hot stone till it was dry.
And he eats and drinks these simples, as well as preparing elements that he puts in his ears and his mouth. And in another moment of gross-out horror, stuff comes out of orifices for quite a while. The lozenges he creates for the mouth he gives to a haughty boy, who chews on it and releases essence of cat turd. You'll see that kind of humour in the play Gamma Gurton's Needle, also available from this parish.
I felt it was a straw.
Fee, Hodge, what's that? May it not be within it?
Break it, fool, with thy hand, and see, and thou canst find it.
Hey, break it you, Hodge, according to your word.
Gog's size. Fie, it stinks. It is a cat's turd. It were well done to make thee eat it, by the mass.
This matter amendeth not.
But his simples work. He can hear someone calling for Isegrim. And no one else can hear anything except for the mewing of a cat on the leads. And so he rushes off to hear what they say. But here, Master Streamer makes a mistake. He's put prepared pillows in his ears to draw out something or other, and that makes his hearing extra sensitive.
Meow. For there was nothing within 100 mile of me done on any side from so far, but no farther the air may come because of obliquation. But I heard it as well as if I had been by it, and could discern all voices, but by means of noises understand none.
Here we get what is essentially semi-skeltonic verse.
Lord, what ado women made in their beds! Some scolding, some laughing, some weeping, some singing to their sucking children, which made a woeful noise with their continual crying. And one shrewd wife, a great way off, I think at St. Albans, called her husband cuckold, so loud and shrilly that I heard that plain, and would fain have heard the rest, but I could not by means of barking of dogs, grunting of hogs, wawling of cats, rumbling of rats, gaggling of geese, humming of bees, rousing of bucks, gaggling of ducks, singing of songs, ringing of pans, crowing of cocks, sewing of socks, cackling of hens, scribbling of pens, peeping of mice, trolling of dice, curling of frogs and toads in the bogs, chirping of crickets, shutting of wickets, shrieking of owls, flittering of fowls, routing of knaves, snorting of slaves, farting of churls, flitting of girls, and with many things else, as ringing of bells, counting of coins, mounting of groins, whispering of lovers, sprinkling of plovers, groaning and spewing, baking and brewing, scratching and rubbing, watching and shrugging, with such a sort of co-mixed noises as would a deaf anybody to have heard. Meow.
And then, to top it all off, the nearest church bell strikes, and he screams and hides in the chimney, which causes the servants of the house to hunt him out and not find him. Only when a crow calls him a knave does he pull himself together enough to put the pillows back into his ears so that his hearing is muffled enough so that he can listen into the cats without further incident. After which fun and games ends the second part of his oration. This is where I think it really does lean into both comedy and grossness and lots of interesting. It's quite an active sequence, and it's excessive. I mean, it goes into excessive lengths describing how to make the potion in ways that are frankly disgusting. And I think there is great glee and delight in that, and it is a very enjoyable sequence to perform, it has to be said, and I am looking forward to devising how that section will work in a full production. But now we hit the third part of Master Streamer's oration, and finally, delayed gratification or what, we actually get to hear what cats are up to. After more astronomical throat clearing, he finds that the cats are holding a court of inquiry. There's a judge type of cat who arrives as not quite a jury panel, but certainly witnesses, and we discover that this is day 3 of an account of one cat's life story. This cat is Mouse Slayer, who has been accused of breaking the laws of cats, and has to justify her existence by telling her life story.
Meow. Meow. I will, my lord, quoth Mouse Slayer, which is the cat which, as I told you, stood before the great cat, before continually mewing, who in her language, after that with her tail she made curtsy, shrunk in her neck, and said, whereas by virtue of your commission from my lord Camoloch, whose life Heget and Hegs defend, who by inheritance and our free election enjoyeth the empire of his traitorously murdered mother, the goddess Grimolochin, you his griefier and chief counsellor, my lord Grissard, with Isegrim and Polnoir your assistants, upon a complaint put up in your high dais by that false accuser catch-rat, who beareth me malice because I refused his lecherously offered delights, have caused me in purging myself before this honourable company to declare my whole life since the blind days of my kittlinghood.
So Mouseslayer has jumped from home to home and starts with a tale about an old devout Catholic, which leads to some wry mockery of the rituals involving the host. You had to be there. There was a lot of this kind of thing going on during and after the reign of Edward. See John Bonn and Master Parson by Luke Shepherd, also on the podcast. Give you an idea of the sort of games that are going on here. Mouseslayer moves on now to a new household and takes up with, well, once again, someone else we've already encountered on the podcast. It's basically Dame Cyrith, which is a story that we have done an audio adaptation of.
And come a motor clerk with crown. To my daughter his love bead, and she would not follow his rede. He ne might his will have, for nothing he might crave. Then began the clerk to witch, and shaped my daughter to a bitch. This is my daughter that I of speak, for dell of her mine heart breaketh. Look how her eye greeted, on her cheek and the tears meeting. 40 days.
Now, she isn't called Dame Cyrith in the story, but it is pretty much exactly the same story as we find in Dame Cyrith, just via a different route and a little muddled. Anyway, this figure, her new dame, runs an establishment for thievery and bawdry, and this establishment and this dame is at hand to help young men get access to young women. In this version of the story, a chap wants to bed a young lady. She doesn't necessarily know anything about this, and this dame assists. The trick utilised in this story from Dame Cyrith and lots of other versions, and so you can listen to our podcast version if you like, is that she persuades the young lady to believe her cat, in the original story a dog, confused by a mistranslation, that her cat is in fact her daughter transformed into an animal. To make the cat, Mouseslayer, seem sad at her change from being a human, she gives the cat mustard and blows pepper into her eyes. The cat is not desperately pleased about this.
Meow. Wherefore, forced through desire of that which he could not but long for, and so much the more because it was so earnestly denied him, he brake his mind to my dame, and entreated her to aid him to win this young woman's favour, and promised her for her labour whatsoever she would require. Whereupon my dame, which was taken for as honest a woman as any in the city, found the means to desire this young woman to a dinner. And against she should come, my dame gave me a piece of pudding, which she had filled full of mustard, which as soon as I'd eaten wrought so in my head that it made mine eyes run all the day after. And to mend this, she blew pepper in my nose to make me neeze.
With this fake daughter turned into a cat established, the dame hands a letter explaining that a young man who pined to death cursed her daughter for refusing him sex. This convinces the young lady that she should probably accept any upcoming young man who wants to get involved.
I sue not to you, my dear unloving love, for any kind of grace, the doubtful hope whereof despair hath long since with the pouring showers of cruel words utterly quenched. But this much I desire, which also by right methinketh my faithful love hath well deserved, that sith your fidelity in wedlock, which I can and must needs praise, as would to God I could not, will suffer my pined course no longer to retain the breath through cold cares wholly consumed, that at the least, which is an office of friendship before the gods meritorious, come visit him, who if aught might quench love should not love, whose mouth these 3 days have taken no food, whose eyes the like time have taken no rest, whose heart these 3 weeks was never merry, whose mind these 3 months was never quiet, whose bed these 7 nights was never made, and who, to be brief, is in all parts so enfeebled that living he dieth and dead alive.
Now, because this is a slightly muddled telling of an earlier tale, it doesn't quite hold full water, but at least in this version it's less coercive. It's more of a nudge towards accepting a young man as her lover rather than effectively a direct you better do this or you will definitely turn into a cat, or in the original version dog. Mouseslayer gets her revenge for having to eat mustard by releasing a mouse up her dame's skirts, and in a show of catching it scratches her dame's thighs and other things very, very badly. After this, Mouseslayer goes off with the young woman, who is now having an affair come about with all this coercion. And it's at this point in the book that we hit the crime that Mouseslayer supposedly committed, and, which is another dig at Catholic fecundity, it is a crime for cats to refuse congress with another cat. Mouseslayer, having been badly treated by an ex-cat rat, refuses his advances, in part because he won't give her any food whilst she was pregnant.
Meow. In this time, I say, when I was great with Kittling, I found him in a gutter eating of a bat, which he had caught that evening, and, as you know, not only we, but also women in our case, do oft long for many things. So I then longed for a piece of the mouse, and desired him, for saving of my kitten, to give me a morsel, although it were but of the leather-like wing. But he, like an unnatural ravenous churl, ate it all up, and would give me none. And as men do nowadays to their wives, he gave me bitter words, saying we longed for wantonness, and not for any need. This grieved me so sore, chiefly for the lack of that I longed for, that I was sick 2 days after. And if it had not been for good Dame Isegrim, who brought me a piece of a mouse, and made me believe it was of a back, I had lost my burden by kittening 10 days before my time. Meow.
The court, thankfully, appears to defend her choice, which I suppose is a blessing. But there is a nasty aftertaste to this sequence. It has to be said, there is a tad bit of underlying misogyny within the text. Beyond the cat-woman axis described here, we have an earlier moment when our author talks of the kinds of nonsense that women go on about. Baldwin was in good company with his peers. John Hayward, from a generation previously, relied heavily on that sort of bros-before logic. That isn't to say that the men come out completely uncritically of the narrative. Many of them are either idiots or a bit nasty, but I wouldn't say the scales land that much against them in comparison. The next chap at the centre of the next story is a guy who glues walnut shells to Mouseslayer's feet for kicks. Told you there's some not desperately nice men in this. And he gets his comeuppance in a comedy set piece where people end up falling down staircases, people end up with poo in their face. It's another moment that has parallels with a cat moment in Gamma Gurton's Needle, where the eyes of a cat are seen to flash in the dark. Meow.
Before in other places I ran towards them, thinking to meet them, but when the priest heard me come, and by a glimpse had seen me, down he fell upon them that were behind him, and with his chalice hurt one, with his water-pot another, and his holy candle fell into another priest's breech beneath, who, while the rest were hoarsening me, was conjuring our maid at the stair-foot, and all to besinged him, for he was so afraid with the noise of the rest which fell that he had not the power to put it out. When I saw all this business down, I ran among them where they lay on heaps, but such a fear as they were all in, then I think was never seen afore. For the old priest, which was so tumbled among him that his face lay upon a boy's bare arse, which belike was fallen headlong under him, was so astonished that when the boy, which for fear beshit himself, had all to raid his face, he neither felt nor smelt it, nor removed it from him. Then went I to my dame, which lay among the rest, God knoweth, very madly, and so mewed and curled about her that at last she said, I ween it to be my cat. Meow.
After the incident of the tap-dancing cat in the night-time, Mouse-Slayer starts feeling bad for her master, whose wife is having an affair, of course. She is giving her lover all the good victuals, and her husband dregs and spending rather a lot in the household accounts. So when her husband comes home early one night, Mouse-Slayer helpfully mews at the naked lover, hiding behind an arras, and, you'll hear.
While this gentleman was doing with my dame, my master came in so suddenly that he had no leisure to pluck up his hose, but with them about his legs ran into a corner behind the painted cloth, and there stood, I warrant you, as still as a mouse. As soon as my master came in, his wife, according to her old wont, caught him about the neck and kissed him, and devised many means to have got him forth again, but he, being weary, sat down and called for his dinner. And when she saw that there was none other remedy, she brought it him, which was a mess of pottage and a piece of beef, whereas she and her Frenion had broke their fast with capons, hot venison, marrowbones, and all other kinds of dainties. I, seeing this, and minding to show my master how he was ordered, got behind the cloth, and to make the man speak, I all to pawed him with my claws upon his bare legs and buttocks, and for all this he stood still and never moved. But my master heard me, and thinking I was catching a mouse, bade my dame go help me, who, knowing what beast was there, came to the cloth and called me away, Come, puss, come, puss, and cast me meat onto the floor. But I, minding another thing, and seeing that scratching could not move him, suddenly I leapt up and caught him by the genitals with my teeth, and bit so hard, when he had restrained more than I thought any man could, at last, he cried out, and caught me by the neck, thinking to have strangled me. My master, not smelling, but hearing such a rat as was wont to be about such walls, came to the cloth and lifted it up, and there he found this bare-arsed gentleman strangling me, who had his stones in his mouth. And when I saw my master, I let go my hold, and the gentleman his, and away I ran immediately to the place where I now dwell, and never came there since. So that how they agreed among them, I cannot tell. Nor never durst go, see, for fear of my life.
And thus the conclave of cats closes, and our narrator goes to bed. The next morning he overhears some other cats who relate a few other details of what Mouse-Slayer had related the night before. There is a tale of how Mouse-Slayer almost smothers someone to death in a narrative that isn't particularly resolved, and I really don't quite know what's going on with that short little tale. It feels underdeveloped. And also how she discovered the gold of a usurer who had previously pleaded poverty, discovering it to his neighbours. This almost leans into associations of usury with anti-Jewish tropes. Not quite, but it is so underdeveloped that it is a case of blink and you'll miss it. This is the dying light of Streamer's abilities, a little wrapping up of themes before he eats normal food again and loses his powers. Streamer closes his oration with an appeal for funds to go to Caithness, a place where the cats mentioned as their next spot for Parliament, leaving us with that sense we get in later stories like, say, in The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, of a tale that will go on past its telling, that our protagonist has gone on to discover more about this other secret world, but that we are not privy to that story. We return to the outer layer, to Baldwin's relation of the story, as a warning to the curious, a hint that we should all beware the cat, that we shouldn't cast cats out of our lives, because then they'd know we're up to something. But to simply, just don't do shitty things, people. Just don't. Because the cats are watching. And then we end with a hymn. Because. Who givest wit to whales, to apes, to owls, and kindly speech to fish, to flesh, to fowls, and spirit to men in soul and body clean, to mark and know what other creatures mean, which hast given grace to Gregory, no pope, no king, no lord, whose treasures are their hope, but sinly priest, which like a streamer waves, in ghostly good despised of foolish knaves, which hast, I say, given grace to him to know the course of things above and here below, with skill so great in languages and tongues, as never breathed from Mithridates' lungs, to whom the hunter of birds, of mice and cats, did speak as plain as Kate that thrummeth hats, by mean of whom is openly bewrayed such things as closely were both done and said. To him grant, Lord, with healthy wealth and rest, long life to unload us his learned breast, with fame so great to overlive his grave, as none had erst, nor any after have. Meow. As you do. And that's it from this spoilers episode. Do let me know. I have skimmed through quite a lot. I would like to do more on this, but time and tide waits for no cat. So if you have any opinions, you think that I'm in plain error and I have, as I say, danced through this fairly quickly, do get in touch and I might re-edit based on your thoughts. For our regular listeners to the podcast, there is a recording of my live show, but it won't be dropping on the pod for a while. You can listen to it for free on our Patreon feed. You do need to subscribe as a free subscriber, but otherwise it has no strings. Why am I doing this? Well, as I said earlier, it's because I'm developing Beware the Cat as a full live show. In shape it will be roughly the same as my live reading. I suspect that the chief incidents that I picked out will be what's staying, but it will be adapted a bit more. I'm taking a certain line on how it's going to be staged, and I'm going to make it a lot more performy. And because it will be a show for which I will need to sell tickets, I need to put the forerunner, as it were, behind some kind of a barrier. At the time of release of this episode, that barrier, as I say, is just to sign up to the platform. As and when I go on the road with it, I might put it behind a more formal paywall. Only after it is done as a live show, by which time it would be nice, I might have done a video version, then I will post it on the podcast as usual for free, because I hate hiding things. Most of our work is public, but I do have to protect potential commercial viability of the show. So, if you want to hear Beware the Cat live, go to our Patreon and sign up for free. Links will be in the show description. If you just don't want to go there, slippery slope and all that, I fully understand. There's an exploring session reading of this book available, which I'm not putting behind a paywall, because it's a bit ropey, frankly. It's an exploring session. I stagger through it, and it's not a great edit of the text as well, so I trip through sentences in weird ways. But all of the text is there, plus my thoughts, and it's all there uncut, and certainly there will be other thoughts that I had several years ago on this, which I haven't related now, and possibly have changed my mind about. I don't know. I haven't listened to it recently. I started fresh this time. So that's all the closing bump from me, Robert Crighton, your host. All that remains to say is, till next time, beware the cat.